So, I am so glad we are in the book of Mark. I've just found living in this narrative to be refreshing and inviting over the last few weeks, and we've heard the same from lots of you guys. And I think the reason why I enjoy Mark is because a narrative, a story, especially in Scripture and especially about Jesus, has the potential to invite us in. There's something really engaging about it. And we do this all the time with movies and with books, don't we? For instance, my family, we love Harry Potter. We've all read Harry Potter, watched Harry Potter. We're Harry Potter fans. And if you're a Harry Potter fan, you likely have a character in the series that you identify with. Someone you kind of hope that you're like, or someone you see yourself in. Maybe you've even taken the Harry Potter personality test. We all have. I'm a Hufflepuff. Maybe you wish that that letter would arrive on your front step. I know I have a couple of kids who wish that, and take you away from your family and take you to a magical castle where you can learn all about wizardry. Maybe you wonder if you could be as brave as Cedric Diggory. Or maybe you're a little bit worried that you might have a little bit of Malfoy in you. Well, Mark kind of engages us in the same way as Harry Potter. We are invited into the story that Mark tells, to find ourselves in the characters, to wonder what we would say or how we might react. And because Jesus is actually present and active in his word, there's even more magic in the book of Mark than there is in Harry Potter. Because the questions that Jesus poses, the challenges he brings, the comfort he offers, these are not just stories that we tell or listen to. They are actually questions, challenges, and comfort that are being offered to us today. And so I invite you, as we read our narrative today, to find yourselves in the story. Do you see yourselves in the Pharisees or the disciples? Maybe you identify with Jesus. And what questions and challenges are being offered to you? So let's jump in. When the Pharisees heard that Jesus had arrived, they came and started to argue with him. Testing him, they demanded that he show them a miraculous sign from heaven to prove his authority. And when he heard this, he sighed deeply in his spirit and said, "Why do these people keep demanding a miraculous sign? I tell you the truth, I will not give this generation any such sign." So he got back in the boat and left them, and he crossed to the other side of the lake. But the disciples had forgotten to bring any food. They had only one loaf of bread with them in the boat, and as they were crossing the lake, Jesus warned them, "Watch out. Beware of the yeast of the Pharisees and of Herod." And at this, they began to argue with each other because they hadn't brought any bread. Jesus knew what they were saying, so he said, "Why are you arguing about having no bread? Don't you know or understand even yet?" I feel like he sounds like a Mennonite right there. Even yet already again? Are your hearts too hard to take it in? Do you have eyes? Can't you see? Do you have ears? Can't you hear? Don't you remember anything at all? When I fed the 5,000 with 5 loaves of bread, how many baskets of leftovers did you pick up afterward? 12, they said. And when I fed the 4,000 with 7 loaves, how many large baskets of leftovers did you pick up? 7, they said. "Don't you understand yet?" he asked them. So to put this in context, Jesus has just fed the 4,000 with 7 loaves and a few fish. And this has been preceded by miracles of all kinds. He's raised a kid from the dead. He's fed the 5,000. He's calmed the waters. He's healed. He's chased demons out of people. And the Pharisees, on the heels of all of this, ask for a sign, which Jesus recognizes is just an attempt to entrap him. And so Jesus is having none of it. It says in this passage that he sighs deeply in his spirit. Where my mom's at, you've sighed deeply in your spirit, haven't you? You know what that means. Now, I think the depth of Jesus' feelings are pretty hard to capture here, but if he were texting, it might look like this. Face palm. It's the holy face palm. He realizes that there is no miracle that he can do with the Pharisees that will soften their hard hearts. In fact, if he does a miracle, it will serve just to harden their hearts more. But it's not only the Pharisees he has to contend with, because his disciples, his closest friends, don't get it either. The Pharisees are wicked, but his disciples just seem kind of dumb. See, here Jesus is using the word yeast to describe the Pharisees and Herod. And yeast here and in other places, when it is followed up by this exchange with the Pharisees, helps us to understand that what he is saying is that these people have been corrupted by power. They've been corrupted to the point where they will protect their power or their security at any cost. And as the story moves on, we'll see that it is the cost of rejecting and killing the all-powerful one. Jesus is warning the disciples that they're in danger of the same thing. It's a super dire warning. And they think he's reprimanding them about not bringing enough bread. Another face palm. Jesus says to them, "Can't you see? Don't you hear? Don't you remember? You have followed me. You've seen me heal. You have seen me calm the waters. You've heard my words. Don't you get it? This problem will not be solved by another miracle. This problem will not be solved by another loaf of bread. This problem will only be remedied by learning to see, learning to hear, and learning to remember." And I think Jesus asks us the same questions he asked his disciples. What are we doing that would make Jesus groan deeply, that would make him do the holy face palm? Or are you asking for a miracle when all you really need, or what you really need, is for eyes to be open, for your ears to be unstopped, to remember the ways that Jesus has been present to you already? Is the issue not that you haven't witnessed the miracle, but that you can't see the miracles that have already happened? The Greek word here for remember means to rehearse or to exercise memory, and it signals intention, and it reminds us what the remedy is for our deafness and our blindness. It invites us to take time to think about, to recall, to meditate on the ways that God has been present with us. It means that we tell ourselves the true story about God being present and stop rehearsing the lies that keep us from noticing where God is at. Stories like, if God miraculously meets me in this one situation, then I will have the faith that I need. God will not look after me. I barely have enough time, energy, love, and money to look after myself, so I don't have what I need to share. Oh my goodness, I forgot my lunch. Someone's going to be mad. I didn't do a good job. I better hurry and cover it up. Or I can't lose the little power I have at work or over my family or at school, because then things will spin out of control. I have to hold everyone and everything in check. Let me encourage you instead to create practices of noticing and naming, of remembering the ways that God has been present to you, has shown up for you. This is one way that I've done it. When I was going through a super hard time, couldn't sleep at night, felt awful all the time, I used to count my friends instead of sheep before I fell asleep. So I would go through all of the people that loved me and cared about me, and I never got to the end of my list of friends before I fell asleep. And this practice engaged my whole self in remembering the ways that God was present to me through the people who loved me. And it helped to chase off the lies that blinded my eyes and deafened my ears. And it helped me to open my eyes up to the ways that God was present to me, to the thing that was really going on. Even though I felt like I wasn't loved and cared for, I was being loved and cared for through the people who cared about me. And blind eyes still need to be opened. Let's keep reading. When they arrived at Bethsaida, some people brought a blind man to Jesus, and they begged him to touch the man and heal him. Jesus took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the village. Then, spitting on the man's eyes, he laid his hands on him and asked, "Can you see anything now?" The man looked around. "Yeah," he said, "I see people, but I can't see them very clearly." They looked like trees walking around. So Jesus placed his hands on the man's eyes again, and his eyes were opened. His sight was completely restored, and he could see everything clearly. Jesus sent him away, saying, "Don't go back into the village on your way home." Then Jesus and his disciples left Galilee and went up to the villages near Caesarea Philippi. And as they were walking along, he asked them, "Who do people say I am?" "Well," they replied, "some say John the Baptist, some say Elijah, others say that you are one of the other prophets." But then he asked them, "Who do you say I am?" And Peter replied, "You are the Messiah." But Jesus warned them not to tell anyone about him. So do you see this little theme running through this passage? Through the whole book of Mark. It's this theme of blindness. Jesus rebukes the disciples for not seeing clearly when they're in the boat together. And then right after that is a story of Jesus healing a blind man. It's clearly no mistake that Mark sandwiches this story in here. He's using it to draw us into the narrative and to sort of show us what's happening with the disciples. The point is not that Jesus doesn't have enough power to heal the blind man in one go. It's a picture of what's happening with the disciples. It's like a parable, it's a metaphor. The disciples are only seeing partly. They kind of get what Jesus is about, but everything's still a bit fuzzy. It's kind of like the people look like trees walking around. They see that Jesus is the Messiah, but they're not totally sure what that means yet, and we'll see more about that in the next point. But even with their partial understanding, Peter's confession is important because it is central to his understanding of who Jesus is. It may be partial understanding, it might only be the beginning, but it is a sign that he is starting to see clearly. And again, the narrative invites us in and asks us the question, who do you say that I am? Not just what have you heard people say about me or heard what other people believe about me, not somebody else, but you. Who do you say that I am? So I went to Bible college. I know you're probably super surprised about that. I was good at Bible college. I got all the right answers, I got good marks, I did really well. But I really struggled in my first couple of years with the issue of women in leadership. This is super challenging for me. All of my profs were men, and a lot of them were complementarians. And what that means is this. It means that they didn't believe that women should teach men scripture, and they had pretty defined roles for men and women, especially for wives and husbands. And my favorite prof, one day I remember him teaching a passage of scripture and telling us that wives should obey their husbands just by virtue of the fact that they were wives. And something inside me reeled up. I did not like that. And I started to struggle with this. I learned all of the arguments on all of the sides. I could argue any stance, and yet I couldn't find a place to land myself because the issue was really personal. It felt like it was really deep, but I felt like if I disagreed with my profs, then I might have to abandon ship as far as my faith went. And as I struggled to hold my identity as a woman and my identity as a Christian together, I just felt like these things were going to tear me apart. And one day I just said, listen, God, if this is what you think about women, I think I'm out. And then I read this passage, and it kind of struck me anew. I felt Jesus talk to me, or I understood that Jesus was asking me this question. Who do you say I am? You can tell me the news on the street about what everybody thinks about this issue. You can tell me all of the arguments for the complementarians and the egalitarians, and it's not helping you one bit. It's just tearing you apart. So tell me this. Who do you think I am? Am I loving? Did I make you? Do I know what I'm doing? Am I just a person that other people interpret for you? Or do you know me? Who do you think I am? And I decided that I would trust Jesus. And the next summer I got baptized, and as you can see now, I fully embody an egalitarian point of view about women, and sometimes even a feminist point of view about women. But, but what it required was that I answer that question first. Who do you think I am? That was the starting point. So, who do you say Jesus is? Have you heard Jesus ask you, and have you answered? Maybe there are questions that are clouding your vision. Do you have questions about your identity like I did? Who am I? Where do I fit? How did God make me? How am I supposed to be myself in the world? Do you have doubts and fears about whether you will be okay, or whether your family will be okay, whether you'll be looked after? Or maybe you have questions about faith. What does it mean to follow Jesus? What does it mean for our posture toward people of other faiths, or for the way that we engage pain and suffering in the world? These are all really important questions that we need to struggle with. But if you haven't answered the first question, you will struggle to find clarity. And the first question Jesus poses to you today is, who do you say that I am? Answering that question will help you face into the questions that you have with courage. You might not find all of the answers right away, but you'll have space to live into them and explore them with courage and with faith. Jesus asks us one more question this morning, but let me warn you, it's a hard one. Then Jesus began to tell them that the Son of Man must suffer many terrible things and be rejected by the elders, the leading priests, and the teachers of religious law. He would be killed, but 3 days later he would rise from the dead. And as he talked about this openly with his disciples, Peter took him aside and began to reprimand him for saying such things. Jesus turned around and looked at his disciples, and then he reprimanded Peter. "Get away from me, Satan." Some versions of this say that Jesus says, "Get behind me, Satan." You are seeing things merely from a human point of view, not from God's. Then calling the crowd to join his disciples, he said, "If any of you wants to be my follower, you must give up your own way. Take up your cross and follow me. If you try to hang on to your life, you will lose it. But if you give up your life for my sake and for the sake of the good news, you will save it. And what do you benefit if you gain the whole world, but you lose your own soul? Is anything worth more than your soul?" So these verses in Mark are seen as a turning point in the plot. Up to this point, we've seen the power of Jesus' healing ministry. But here is the first statement from Jesus, there's 3 of them from now on in Mark, that predict his suffering and death. Jesus is going to redefine what it means to be the Messiah, and the mood gets a little gloomier, a little darker. Now, Peter has no time for Jesus' definition of what it means to be the Messiah, and it's kind of understandable, because for Peter, what the Messiah meant was this, that the Messiah comes to rescue his people, to claim his position as king, to work justice for his people, and to defeat Israel's enemies. And this wasn't just Peter's understanding of the Messiah. This was everybody's understanding of the Messiah. Nobody at this point sees a suffering Messiah. Those 2 things just don't go together. And so here's where Peter gets it wrong. It's not so much that he doesn't understand that Jesus has to suffer and die. It's that in one moment, he confesses that Jesus is the Messiah, but in the next, he rebukes him. And Jesus has to say, "Get back into place. Get behind me." You don't instruct someone that you just claimed is the Messiah. Remember that blind man? Peter, representing the disciples, just like the blind man, sees only partially. They all need clearer vision, but it's only going to come one way, and that's by following. Peter's confession is a start, but it's not enough. Because the crucial divide is not so much between those who do and don't confess Jesus as between those who do and don't follow him. Then we see Jesus turn to the crowd after he rebukes Peter and says, "If you want to be my disciple, you have to follow me. You have to go the way I go. You have to do what I do. If you confess that I am the Messiah, you can't rely on your old ways of understanding things. You have to trust me with your life. And trusting me with your life means, of course, following me into death, if need be. What Jesus says and then embodies as he goes to the cross actually displays for us the heart of discipleship, and that is the cross. So, this is exacting news. Jesus doesn't leave room for wishy-washiness. There's not a lot of wiggle room here. These are hard words. Take up your cross, lay down your life. I confess to you today that there are some things I have a hard time laying down. I'm not sure sometimes if I have what it takes to follow Jesus. I'm not sure if I'm willing or able, and if I'm honest, I'm a little bit afraid too. And I struggled with this passage a lot this week. And then I took a break one evening from writing. I went for a walk and listened to a podcast. And I heard this YouTube that I went home and immediately looked up. And it is The Sound of Pure Bliss. So let me just set this up for you. This Norwegian man, Alexander Game, he's doing a 3-month trek to the South Pole. So he goes up to the South Pole and comes back. And on his way up to the South Pole, he hides stashes of provisions on the way up that he digs back up on his way down. And this video is him digging up his last stash on day 86 of his trek. He doesn't remember what's in there. It's been too long. And he's tired and he's hungry.
Se her, ja. Og nå er jeg jævla spent på om jeg har lagt igjen noe mer igjen. Bare grunnrasjon, som det var noe annet som kan spises her. Tenk om jeg hadde lagt igjen noe godteri. Det hadde vært toppers. Er det noe godteri her? Jeg tror ikke det er noe. Men det er alltid lov å håpe. Fyrstikker, enda mer vaselin. Det har jeg for så vidt ikke bruk for. Sinksalve, så faller jeg la igjen. Det er ganske mye her, altså. Det var tydeligvis bra. Ja! 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 Er det virkelig? Hæ? La jeg igjen det? Ja. Det er dobbel pose cheese-noodles. Ja! Ja! Jeg er så sulten. Resten er vel bare søppel. Ja. Ekstra skje. Pumpe til primus, så har jeg hatt 2 stykker allikevel. Ekstra trakt, den har jeg ikke hatt på noe. Ekstra trekktøv. Hva er det jeg har tenkt, da? Har jeg drevet lagt inn dette her? Jeg har sikkert tenkt at jeg har prøvd å spart vekt, da. Det er jo ikke mulig. Hæ? Her er Mentos. Her er ost. Hva Jeg har lagt igjen alt her som jeg burde ha lagt igjen på det neste depotet. Ja, herregud! Og det var det, da. Nei. Er det Hæ? Jeg blir helt gal! Solen mio, halleluja, 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 halleluja.
He is so happy about those cheese doodles. There's 2 of them, not just one. And then he finds chocolate and Mentos and oozed cheese and gummy worms. And the Norwegian just makes it sound more joyful, right? Like you can just hear the Swedish chef from your Muppets experiences. I love the video, his hair, his joy. It's all so great. So great. And I wondered as I listened to this podcast, if the reason that we don't want to follow Jesus, or part of the reason, because it actually is a really hard call, is because we don't understand what he's actually offering to us. We've heard the news of the cross wrong. Maybe you've heard it this way. I have. We were all born sinful, totally sinful. And because we're totally sinful, God can't be in relationship with us. So some of you might have even been given the impression that God doesn't like you very much and he kind of like holds you off like this, like a bit of a stinky dish rag or something. And because we're so bad, somebody had to be punished for the bad things we did. And so Jesus stepped in and took that punishment on our behalf. So God killed Jesus in order to punish him for all of the bad things we did. And then there's this sense that maybe he's just like always a little bit angry at us, and that every time, he starts to get angry, Jesus steps in and is like, I looked after that, remember? Right? Calm down. So what are the pictures that we get of God when we understand the cross this way? That he's punitive, that he wants to punish us, that he's resistant to us, that he doesn't really want to come close, that he has to be convinced that we are worthy of love, and that he kills his own son in order to punish him or to punish us. This is wrong, wrong, wrong. The cross instead is the embodiment, the expression of God's deep love and commitment to God's creation. It is the display of how far and wide and deep the love of God is, and how committed he is to overcome the brokenness and sin that keep us from responding to his love. The cross does not settle a score. It shows us that the score has always been settled. The cross is the incarnation of God's posture toward his creation. There is no price on God's love. The cross displays and makes real that there is no darkness that God's love doesn't reach. There is no person who breathes apart from God's love. There is actually no world without God's love. It is the very heart of creation. The very heart of creation is from God's overflowing love, and it's what will remain in the end. And we, in our brokenness and in our sin, have lost sight of this. We are deaf and blind, and we can't remember. And God catches our attention by letting sin and brokenness do its worst to him through us on the cross. Kill goodness personified. And you know what? Only sin and brokenness die. Goodness comes out the other side, resurrected. And so laying down our life and taking up our cross is really just a way of slipping free of brokenness and sin, the things that cloud our eyes and keep our ears stopped. It's beating death to the punch. And the irony is that in laying down our lives, the lives that we mistake for the good life, we find that real life is even better. So here's where I find hope. If everything that distracted us were stripped away, if we had just gone on a trek to the South Pole and had to eat canned Spam every night for dinner, If we really got it, if our eyes were opened and our ears unblocked, we would see that suffering and death actually clear all of that stuff away so that we can see the gift that's always been offered to us. There is love that nothing can overcome or undermine. And that's worth everything. That's like a stash of cheese doodles on the way home from the South Pole, right? Hallelujah. That's really good news. And here's where else I find hope. Look at Peter. Look at the disciples. They didn't have a clue. And sometimes we don't either. But you know what? The half-blind can still follow. So Jesus' last question comes to us this morning. Are you willing to put to death, to lay down the relationships, the attachments, the securities, the identities that you think you can't live without, but that are actually clouding your vision? Will you let me lead you where you need to go? Will you follow me?